Today we're participating in a challenge by Where Winds Meet. It's a 100-hour challenge, so we don't have much time to create this magnificent piece, so let's go ahead and get started. The weapon that we're forging today from Where Winds Meet is called the Heng blade, which is their interpretation of a Tang Dynasty Dao, which is a sword that was highly influential to the evolution of swords in all of Asia and often overlooked. So it gives us a great opportunity to recreate an amazing piece of history. What Where Winds Meet has challenged us to do is participate in a challenge that they issued to creators called the Anything Can Be Heng Blade Challenge. Basically, they give creators 100 hours to create a design of whatever they choose based off of the Heng blade. Well, for us it was obvious. We're just gonna make the weapon. You might be thinking 100 hours for a challenge to make something is a long time, and you're right. But to make something historical with this much detail, it's really not a lot of time at all. So we're going to try to do things as efficiently as possible without compromising the historical aspect of the final piece.
Historical descriptions of these swords mention that they are almost always pattern welded. And in China, a multibar twisted pattern was starting being developed around the 9th century, so that is what I'm choosing. I'm choosing 4 bars, which I will twist, and I will insert a straight random pattern as my edge.
We noticed that the Tang Dao in Where Winds Meet is made using a similar approach. The blade even looks like it's Damascus, twisted Damascus at that, and the level of detail and authenticity is impressive. They've done a great job recreating the weapon, even managing to bridge historical craftsmanship with its in-game representation. We know that we're not alone in feeling this way, and that the viewers of this channel also agree that when a game goes out of their way to have the artifacts in their game be very close to historical items, it just adds something to it, and it allows us to create something not only fantastical but also historical. So Where Winds Meet, definitely check plus in that category.
With the bars now ready for forge welding, it's time to make the insert, which will become our cutting edge.
We've been a part of a lot of different recreations of historical pieces, specifically blades. We've done a lot of different multi-bar twists. We've done a lot of Japanese builds with those edge inserts, but I've never seen the combination of both. Usually people just add another bar for the edge bar, not actually doing an insert. And if you look real close, you can see that prominent edge bar forge welded into it like that. I think it really shows some cool techniques and an understanding of how these ancient blades were made. I think it's a step that I'm proud to have been a part of and watch Ilya make, and I think it'll really show in the final piece.
Once the preform is of the desired length, it's time to isolate the material and begin shaping the tank. To form the tip, I first cut off the bar and then hand forge it all the way back. The reason why it's done is so that our cutting edge insert goes all the way along from the tip down the blade. It's also part of best practices in such situations to employ this technique. The reason is the future buyer will know that you took care in making sure that all the grain is following the right direction.
For the initial blade grinding, it's rather simple. I'm basically just going to be decking the surfaces, removing all the scale to prevent decarb during the heat treat. After the heat treat is when we'll do a lot more of the blade sculpting, the edge, and the fuller.
Being the main blade grinder in the shop isn't always all that glamorous, but I do get one thing that no one else gets, and that is I get to see the pattern that lies underneath the scale first, just like you see here. That's pretty cool.
To make the collets for the hilt, I take some scrap silver and melt it down into one ingot, which I later on hammer out under the power hammer and later by hand into one long, thin sheet. Now, in doing research for this historical artifact, and it is in fact historical, one thing archaeologists note is that the pommel or the guard, when they were present, were made out of high quality bronze. However, the collets and the rest of the fittings would have been made from a different material. And since it is noteworthy and we like history here, this is what we're going to do.
While work continues forging out the silver, it's time to go ahead and put the blade in the kiln to begin the heat treat. It's gonna have to sit a while, so I'm just gonna let it sit in there, come up to temp.
After the rough grind, it's time to move on to the heat treat. We're going to be heat treating this rather modernly, meaning we're going to use an electrical kiln and then we're going to be quenching into oil. It's not necessarily how it would have been done, but with the materials that we've used, it's the proper way to get the blade hard. Most of the final desired pattern is actually going to be revealed in the grinding. I have to make sure to trim each side evenly, that way the pattern matches. Once you grind into the twisted bars, it changes the pattern dramatically, adding almost star-like patterns in between, and we want those to be nice and even. To create the pommel on the dowel, we're going to be carving that in wood. The reason we're doing it in wood is because it goes quite fast, and then we'll be able to take that master, press it into some sand, and then make a mold, and then cast some bronze into it. The Chinese were very well known for using sand casting, but the really prolific way they did their casting was actually carving hard molds, carving the negative in, thinking everything in the negative, and then reproducing and being able to reproduce a shape. It was really impressive. We're not quite set up for that, and our time limit here being a 100-hour challenge, we have to do it the way we know best.
Now, speaking of the 100-hour challenge, I should probably update you and let you know where we're at in this project. We're right now just over the halfway mark, about 52 hours. It sounds like we got a lot of time left, but a lot of the time is going to be eaten up at the end when making the silver fittings for the handle. So we need to stay on pace. The extra part of that challenge for us is not only are we making the item, but I'm recording and editing a video in real time as well. So it's a bit of a double challenge, but we've never shied away from one before, so we're not about to start now.
The edge bevels on these blades, well, they're rather small, and to a blade grinder like myself, it doesn't seem much like a challenge, but they have to be super crisp and they have to hit the target. So I'm really going to take care first by doing the blades edge up, and then I'll do my classic down the blade to finish everything out.
As I continue grinding on the blade, Ilya continues working carving on the pommel.
Very often, this category of dowel has a very narrow edge bevel, which is very steep. That is probably because of the development of the metallurgy at the time. Now, a lot of them also have a very thin fuller. And that means when Matt grinds it, he has to get it right the first time, and he doesn't have the option of widening and straightening it.
With the 100 hours quickly dwindling, I'm going to continue grinding on the blade while Ilya gets started on the handle. We're going to be making a 2-part sandwiched handle construction, meaning Ilya's got to carve out a canal that tightly fits the tang on both sides, and then the 2 pieces of wood will be sandwiched together and pinned to the tang later on. Now, I have to lend the blade to him every once in a while so he can check the fit, but in general, we both have to keep working on our respective ends of the project in order to be able to complete it within the time frame. Now time to put the fuller in, and I'm not nervous at all.
Tang Dynasty Dao are really very interesting. When people think of a Dao, Chinese saber, usually think of a curved blade. But of course, the Tang Dao are straight swords, in Chinese called zhibei Dao, or literally straight-backed sabers. What's really interesting about them is we don't really know for certain how they were wielded. The Tang Dynasty was over 1,000 years ago. That straight blade would really deliver a very percussive kind of cut. If you're fighting somebody in armor, slashing cut's not really going to do very much, but that percussive cut might just make a difference. This tip also really suggests that it's armor piercing. Again, sometimes they're double-edged like this, sometimes they have that clip tip, and especially if you grasp it with 2 hands, you can imagine how you could really use that to thrust and potentially pierce armor. Also, that long grip could allow for us to use a two-handed cut, but also it counterbalances that long, heavy blade. So it can really be moved quickly with a single hand. And that straight blade, especially one with a double-edged tip like this, can be used for thrusting and piercing the way we would a Chinese jian, a Chinese double-edged sword. So really a very fascinating, interesting design from well over 1,000 years ago.
One thing that really excited us both about this project was the fact that we're going to finally be able to show you guys some casting on this channel. We've done a lot of casting in the past on other channels and other shops, but here at That Work Studio, this is definitely a first for us. And it'll be awesome getting it set up because we'll be able to do a lot more casting in the future.
By the 9th century, Chinese cultural power was so broad within the region that other countries were imitating this style of dress as well as style of weaponry. The pommels would usually be attached by a lap and a rivet to the tang, meaning these blades are not intended to be taken apart and reassembled. Once the craftsman completes it, it's intended to be as is. The current pommel we're working with right now has a dragon sparrow on the end. Now, when I studied Chinese art and architecture, we used to call them dragon phoenix, but subsequently different scholars chose different names. Very often, like the example in the mat, you will have dueling dragons or twin dragons depicted in the pommel. Now, this has very specific meaning in Chinese art and recalls back to the offerings of jade circles. Some of them would have had images of dragons or phoenixes carved in the middle. These offerings would be usually submitted to the river gods or local deities and probably signified either a prayer or an auspicious event.
With the bronze pommel now well underway, it's time to return to the silver that Ilya hammered out earlier to create the rest of the fittings for the handle.
The end of the Sui dynasty and the beginning of the Tang dynasty is the 9th century. And that is an incredibly important 100 years in the cultural history of China. New types of poetry is being composed, which later on becomes the classic Chinese verse. Now, poetry is very important in Chinese culture, especially warrior culture. The reason is the civil service exam. The structure of Chinese culture at the time is anybody from any village can memorize the classics. The classics do include Taoist, Confucian, and other philosophies, and you submit from memory your essay on the classics that gives you a promotion. So now you can go and work as an administrator in the capital or somewhere higher than you were. In fact, it was such a big deal for someone to pass the civil service exam that even to this day you can see at the entrances to Chinese villages those gates. Those are called pai lo, and they signify a member of the village getting a good score in the civil service exam. The reason why I'm bringing up the civil service exam is if you don't pass it, it's highly likely you wouldn't be allowed to own a sword like this. On the fittings of the blade, you see a repeating cloud motif, which is traditional in Chinese art. So what I do is I take my collets and fill them with pitch. After they compress in the vise, I use my chisels not to carve away the silver, but to move it around. Think of the procedure as shaping a balloon where the internal volume does not change, but the shape of the outside surface morphs completely. We've cast the pommel because the purpose of the pommel is to be a counterweight, a counterbalance. Now, the collets and the rest of the fittings don't function as a counterbalance, and they're supposed to be as light as possible. So I'm going to use sheet silver and create the design with hammer and chisel.
After the silver pieces are fit onto the handle, the final bit of texturing to the background of the design is added. This allows you to be able to shrink the silver to fit the handle perfectly. So not only do you get texture, but you also get a perfect fit. The final pieces to create in silver are the rosettes or the floral pieces that will work as a dual purpose, both as a place for the handle pins to slide into and also as stone settings for our turquoise that will be mounted at the very end.
Animals, dragons, phoenixes, symbols of power, status, and as well as noble rank. So, for example, a 5-fingered dragon would not be allowed to be carried by someone below the rank of general because that signifies the emperor. A 4-fingered dragon is the level of the general. Now, in some ring swords, you have dueling dragons that also remind us of the Tao Tie, the apotropic image that is very present on almost all Chinese bronzes throughout the dynasties.
With the blade now finally going into etch, and just a few finishing touches left to be made on the sword, we're almost done, and thankfully so, because our 100 hours are quickly closing in. We really appreciate when games like Where Winds Meet take historical designs of the items that they put into the game and use them as inspiration. really helps us as makers have a historical foundation on exactly what it is we're making and how to do it. I hope you enjoyed this one. And a very special thank you to Scott Rodell from the Academy of Chinese Swordsmanship. Be sure to check out his amazing channel, Great River Taoist Center. There, he's got a ton of amazing videos breaking down the history of Chinese weaponry and how they are supposed to be used.
Thanks again to Where Winds Meet for creating this challenge. It's been real fun to be a part of it. Be sure to go check out the game to see this, the Hung Blade in-game, and the brand new territory, Liangzhou, where you get to open up brand new paths and explore all new opportunities in battle. If you want to participate in the 100-hour challenge, be sure to use the hashtag right here, anything can be Hung Blade, and make something inspired by this piece. If you enjoyed this, be sure to drop us a like and tell us in the comments what historical or fun piece that you'd like to see this team build next. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel that works.